Let me first of all thank all of you for being here this morning. I think I think seeing such a large crowd does give you butterflies in your tummies. Right? So please um, bear with me as we go through this. I'm not quite used to speaking to very large crowds. I mean, often in my line of work, we speak to boardrooms and senior management, which ends up being less than 20 people in the room. So 300-400 is a bit overwhelming for me. I think when my friend Firdaus, called and asked me to speak today, I must admit, I was extremely hesitant. For three reasons, actually. Firstly, I thought I was, way too young. I think to speak at forums such as this, you at least need to be over 50. And I think for certain people, in fact, if you are below 80, you really don't deserve to be speaking at all. So firstly, I was very hesitant because too young. Secondly, I think perhaps there really is already too much skepticism in society, and I certainly don't want to add to that. And thirdly, I think at a personal level, perhaps there has been a bit too much publicity about my own position, and therefore coming to speak to you is not high on my to-do list. But those same reasons, I think, are precisely why I'm here today. Because, firstly, I think, being young actually is when the voices need to be heard, and these sorts of events bring me back to, some 15 years ago when like Firdaus, it's so refreshing to see that in each generation there are young people that continue to want to build and engage and bring others on this journey. And I'm so glad that Firdaus, you're doing this. YCM follows a very great tradition in Malaysia of young people coming back and creating modalities for dialogue. Yeah, and true to form in Malaysia, things grow, they peak, and then they move on. YCM is one of many such organizations, and there's nothing to lament about. I think this speaks to the regenerative ability of society, and I'm so glad that you're doing this. I think on the point of too much skepticism, I think skepticism exists when there is no dialogue, and I think it's so important that we as part of the broader younger generation continue to do this. I think on the adverse publicity, all I can say is I remain amazed that, to paraphrase Churchill, people who know so little about you can write so prodigiously about something that they know very little about. But I suppose this is in the best traditions of Malaysia, and in particular Malaysian bloggers. So what I hope to do today is perhaps to give you a better sense of where we're coming from, where my firm is coming from, and to enter into that dialogue with you. I think Karen mentioned that both Justin and I come from this university, but can I remind you that lest you feel that people from this university are all establishment figures, my good friend Tony Pua, member of the opposition of PG Utara, is also a friend, and we studied together, in fact, in the same year. So I want to give you a sense that I think the time has come, and I'm very happy to see Malaysia is coming to a point where talented people should be on both sides of the aisle, whether it's on government or on opposition, whether in the corporate sector, whether you are in academia and civil society. I think that sort of movement needs to happen, and should happen, because this is a hallmark of a maturing society. I hope that continues. What I'd like to do today, I understand we've got 1.5 hours, and being a typical consultant, I came with charts, so I do apologize for. So they're not many. There are about 3 or 4, but I would like to, in a way, set the stage for this morning's discussion about globalization, and really provide the analytics behind, I think, a lot of what Yang Muhammad Mulia Tengku spoke about this morning, just so that we debate and we look at things from a pretty robust fact base, and I think that hopefully will provide a basis for the conversation for the rest of the day. Tengku did raise a lot of very important questions with respect to Petronas. I don't intend to answer that, even from my small perch in Petronas. But can I just say that, I'll try. I mean, Petronas Twin Towers is not for sale today, but maybe we can do something about it and put it up for sale in the future. So let me start by giving you a context. I think clearly the growing impact of globalization is evident across many areas today. Yeah? And I think, here are some thoughts on this. As we know, global trade to GDP, a measure of how interconnected economies are today, is growing. Right? In 1990 it was 20%. It's grown to 30% today. 70 out of about 181 countries today are considered trade dependent. What does that mean? They have trade to GDP ratios above 100%, which means that your trade, your value of your trade is more than the GDP of your country. Well, that's a good half of the world is trade dependent. Yeah? So I think that's sort of point number one about increasing globalization. Point number two about investments. I think the traditional capital exporters of the world have always been the high-income, developed economies. What is a growing trend, though, I think, is large economies, large developing economies starting to become capital exporters. So if you look at the outflow column, I think that's where you should look, where China and India are beginning. Are in fact beginning to be capital exporters. It's estimated, I think, by 2020, China will be a net capital exporter, and that's very significant from a globalization point of view. I think it means that Chinese companies, it means that perhaps Asian values, it means that practices of Chinese and Indian companies will be more pervasive beyond their domestic shores. Malaysia, I think, if you look at where we are today, I think we are at the cusp of being a net capital exporter. Right? And this has significant implications in terms of how our economic structure will develop over the intervening period. So point there is, I think, as you move to a high-income economy, invariably economies become capital exporters. Second dot point on investments, I think, as a tidbit, look, 12 years ago, Bursa Malaysia was the second largest exchange in Asia, ex-Japan. Right? Today, we are 9th out of 13. Right? So it really says something about the way capital markets have developed. And so we have to ask ourselves, in terms of investments, really, where are we and what can we do about it? But this is an area which I'm sure Justin will pick up on, since he's a guy from Goldman Sachs and I'm just a management consultant.